students, and welcome to a special lecture on your analysis of a law assignment. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to take you very quickly through your assessment instructions, and then I'm going to take you through a couple of sample papers from previous years for the analysis of a law assignment. Hopefully by going through these papers and showing things that are maybe good, things that are maybe not so good, you can develop some clearer ideas for yourself about what I'm looking for and what you need to do a good paper. So let's jump into that, shall we? Obviously, due this weekend, very, very soon. I've assessed plans for most students. There's still a number of students that perhaps have not submitted assessment or have pulled out, but so you'll have some feedback already on your plans. Referring to the assessment instructions, you must use the Guy Powell's minimum standards framework. That is literally the assessment task. And so you have to mention it, you have to use it, and you have to use it in the way that we've sort of indicated, because we're trying to get you to practice doing something in particular, applying a theoretical framework to explain why the problem that you've identified is a problem and the nature of the problem. Does it have to do with understanding the law? Does it have to do with the fact that the law isn't applicable? Does it have to do with the fact that the law is not enforced properly? And identifying those things using the Guy Powell's minimum standards framework is then supposed to point you in the direction you should be going for strengthening that law, right? So you're identifying three things and three ways of strengthening it, using different methods for strengthening law. And so that's the exercise. That's what we're doing. So that's what I need to see from you. Your essay has to include an abstract. In previous years, students have put an abstract in the plan, but not the paper. And they've lost marks because their assessment criteria requires an abstract. Again, I'm trying to expose you to different styles of writing, and an abstract is a particularly important one, I think, and relevant for lawyers, because an abstract is a mini essay. You're trying to condense your 2,000 word paper, 3,000 word paper. I have to write an abstract for my thesis, which is 93,000 words. And it's the same length. It's that same length, about 200 words, maybe 250 if it's, something so big, but short and sweet. And I've given you feedback on that. An abstract is a complete thing. I'll take you through a couple of examples of other students' work in a moment. So that's important. The footnote references. This is required for law. There is a USP School of Law style guide. You are required to follow it. I understand that it's out of date. I understand that most of your lecturers probably aren't enforcing the style guide. But when you produce documents, you can't be using this font plus that font plus this size plus that size plus not correctly italicizing case names plus not italicizing legislation, not properly referring to the legislation, referring to amendment acts instead of the substantive law that the amendment act amended, and a whole range of other things. These are requirements. At some point in the future, someone's going to pay you $300 an hour to produce a document. And if you're practicing turning in trash that is poorly formatted now, what are you going to be turning in the future? When are you going to lift that? So you've had 3 or 4 years of law school, most of you. You should be across the School of Law's requirements and how to cite and reference cases. And if you're not, a magistrate's going to require it of you soon, right? So you need to learn that and do it and practice it in everything you write. So I don't want to harp on about that too much, but I'm terrified from the plans and from the position papers I've read about how poorly the group generally references anything or justifies and supports arguments with evidence. It's a very concerning trend for law students, future lawyers. And of course, you must have a bibliography. Now, those aren't part of your word count, right? So do a good abstract. Make sure you got good references. Make sure you got a bibliography. The marking criteria I've already been through at the start of the semester. This is telling you exactly what I want. This is how you get good marks for the paper. You go beyond the class materials. You polish your essay and write it well. You proofread it. You ensure that you're not using informal language, colloquialisms, etc. You need to build this up. You must use the PALS minimum standards. If you don't identify them at all, you will get not demonstrated for content here. You might manage to not fail, but you're going to limit yourself to a bare pass at the best possible outcome if you don't mention PALS minimum standards framework, because again, this is the second point of your instructions. Okay, so we got that clear. Why don't I now move from that and I will take you to our first sample. Okay, so here we are with this sample. As you can see, generally a good essay looking at the Online Safety Act of Fiji. Other students have looked at this. Some are looking at it this semester. So let's see. So this, all right, but a bit curious, mentions advancement of technology multiple times within the first couple of lines. That's a bit awkward, bit jarring. However, it talks about, and this is a bit of a weird sort of thing, you might want to clean this sort of stuff up. However, it says, the issue is technology. Fiji introduced an Online Safety Act. That could be earlier in the abstract. And this paper discusses this, looks at the weaknesses, and uses the GuiPALS minimum standards framework. And it also mentions some key recommendations. Okay, so, it's an abstract that's on the way, but it's not a complete mini essay. I can't read that and go and think, oh, the Online Safety Act has ABC problems and the solutions, according to this person, are XYZ. That's what I want to get out of your abstract. I want to be able to see, oh, there's an act, there's problems that you've identified, and you've applied PALS framework to identify the nature of them, and you've identified solutions to these problems. That's your abstract. This sort of stuff is unnecessary to begin with. It is literally the beginning. It's the introduction. Like, you don't need to write to begin with, just the United Nations. So this student again has tried to contextualize the topic before introducing the act. That's okay. There's different ways that it can flow. I'd prefer you to start with sort of mentioning the act that you're looking at, and maybe get to, why cyberbullying is an issue after that. This is what the act does. The act's aim is to address cyberbullying, which the United Nations describes as this, and is a big problem, globally. And so there's some discussion here, maybe a little bit more detail than is needed for an introduction. So I'll zoomed out too much here. Ultimately, what we've got, we're just going out and out. Ultimately, what we've got here is a very long introduction. So you can see that's about 350 words. You've only got 2,000 words. So, this could be shorter. It'd be ideal if this was, 150 to 200 words. And I think this student could do that fairly easily. because there's a lot of details about the Act here and what certain sections do. And that's not really introductory text. That's detail. That's stuff. So, when you're analysing it, well, these are the provisions and these are what they do. And these are why they're problematic. So the introduction introduces your essay, but, there's at least some flow. It's coherent. It communicates quite a lot of information. This student then, they don't have a recommendations section, okay? They then move to their analysis, okay? Not good headings, just analysis, This is really the heading. I don't know why these extra headings are there, but I've just ignored that. Like, what's my marking criteria? Do you lose a mark for having an extra heading? There's only so many marks to take away for poor formatting. So, what's good about this? This tells us who PALS is. It references an article, not correctly. That's not how you would cite the Journal of South Pacific Law. You can see Volume 12, Number 1, this is all part of the citation, yet we've just got a web link and not the actual citation. So even though I could probably put that into Google and find it, and even though I could probably click this link and download the paper, there's a lack of consistency in some of this formatting, okay? And this is not how you reference a journal article under any citation style, right? So the School of Law Style Guide will tell you how to cite journals. Okay. This student has then looked at, strengths. So they've taken a bit of a strengths weaknesses approach, but they haven't let it overtake their whole paper. So they've said, okay, here's a strength. It does some things well, right? It's got this system. However, weaknesses. Okay, so again, I would generally say, you don't even really need that, do you? Your task is to apply PALS to identify weaknesses in the law, not strengths. I mean, cool, there's strengths, good. But what are the weaknesses and what do you do to address them? So again, this student could have saved more words and for their recommendations, So the law is not well understood. So we're clearly applying PALS here. Okay, that's nice. Responsible online behavior. Okay, that's what Section 3 says. But it does not it does not provide a definition of responsible online behavior. And there's lack of clarity on principles and so on. Okay, so what would be nice, that's a submission there. What would be nice is to find actual evidence or something from the last 3 years that demonstrates that, right? A case, an example, so on. The law is not effective. Okay, increase in cyberbullying during COVID. The Commission received percentages isn't really useful. Like, what was the number of reports? Was it 161 reports up from 28 reports, or is it up from 28%? These aren't percentages, don't help me very much, but I guess there's a reference. And that's actually a pretty correct reference for news articles. But, yep. So, this is a statement. It's not been successful because the victims are women and children. Well, I mean, that's a thing from 2019, less than a year after the Act came into force. So, wait, so you're saying that it's not effective this paper was written in 2022 based on we identified that women and children are more likely to be involved in cyberbullying than men. It doesn't really... What's the argument? I don't quite get the argument there, do you? Right? How could it have been effective? I mean, clearly it's been effective. There's been 161% reports. Clearly, this is providing an effective mechanism for reporting online bullying, right? What's it supposed to do? You have an act and then suddenly people stop bullying each other? I don't think so. I think you need... Yeah. Perhaps it's not effective because nothing's been enforced, right? perpetrators can remain anonymous. Okay. So it's trying to give reasons for why it's not effective. And we're talking about TikTok and some other things. But again, just wondering again, how does this connect with the statement? We're saying that applying PALS, we can see that, well, for these reasons, the reasons discussed in this paragraph, the law is not effective. But what I'm seeing is that, well, there's actually reporting. So is it not effective because there's been no prosecutions? Because it hasn't prevented this? Well, it was never meant to prevent it, was it? The Online Safety Act, per this student, was enacted to promote responsible online behavior and safety and an online culture that addresses these things and tries to limit harmful content, etc. And provide an efficient means of redress. So this student could be saying that it's not effective because it's not providing an efficient means of redress, and give some sort of evidence there. Tick, done. You know, instead of we're sort of arguing around the point here. The law is not responsive. Okay, delays. Here's an example. Okay, but that doesn't actually give me any evidence. I can't give any credit to that because there's no evidence. The law is not responsive because there's delays. For instance, there was a complaint involving a child. How does that tell me about delays? So that's a bit sloppy. The student then continues the structure, gets to recommendations, and they're looking for a comparative approach. Now, again, okay, they have looked a little bit at a New Zealand law here and said that, you know, that is good and that could help the Online Safety Act. But what I'm not seeing is, well, okay, so if we do this, does that make the law effective? Or does that make the law better understood? How do you make the law, if the problem is that it's not understood and it's not effective and it's not responsive, how does this recommendation make it better in any of those senses? Now, this student is saying adopting communication principle. I'm not sure what this is. So, oh yeah, these are the 10 communication principles here. So this student's saying that we should adopt these 10 principles and says there's one principle that's particularly good. So I'd want to see a bit more of a discussion on applying that approach and how that might address the problem with the law. The student then talks about communicative action. Now, there's no reference to Habermas. Who's Habermas? Where does this come from? Where's your reference? Okay, we need references to Habermas. This is not a full paragraph. Anyway, they've said, oh, look, there's Habermas. Habermas and communicative action. And okay, we're now looking at a bullying case. Okay. So we haven't really explained what communicative action is or how to apply it to solve the problems that we've identified. So, you know, again, it's nice. I like it. You know, great. The student is aware of this. I'm sure they have read something about this. This is broadly in line with it, but there's something missing to sort of elevate this. So it's overall pretty good, this paper, but there are elements missing. And then they've talked about this organizational integrity approach. Again, that's not useful text. It adds nothing to the argument. However, it aims to establish social norms of conduct through promulgating codes of conduct. Okay, that's nice. This is not a valid source. You can't cite lecture material. That's not a reference. You can't use that. But good that it's there. again, weird that we've got this single sentence. That's not a paragraph that's together. But what is the organization that we're hoping will build integrity, right? What is the organizational integrity approach? It aims to establish these things. Okay. So how is promulgating codes of conduct going to make the law in relation to online bullying more effective, more responsive, or more understood? Again, we're sort of talking around the point a little bit. And there was this focus on parental responsibility. This could be its own separate strategy and a very effective one, right, to strengthen the law. The recommendation could be that the government invest in education programs for schools and for parents to address this lack of understanding and awareness about the Online Safety Act and how it works. So, we could get something in there. Responsiveness. Okay, so now we're saying, well, how do we strengthen responsiveness? We're acknowledging that there's a lack of resources, and it's saying that the government should look overseas. So the Cyber Crime Act looks at international cooperation. Okay. It's because we're talking about transnational crimes, and that's required. I'm not sure how Fiji's government could cooperate with a foreign government because a student at RKS was bullying another student online on Facebook in Fiji or on TikTok or whatever. I'm not sure where, if the majority of this is all women and children, and we're not talking about the sort of, the government trying to go after Richard Naidu or other lawyers for saying perfectly reasonable things. Query what the role of a foreign government is in this. But again, the student is aware of a need for better coordination between institutions, and so on. So then we've got effectiveness and compliance. We're sort of now starting to say a lot of the same things. An obligation on ISPs, right? That, Vodafone and Digicel need to take steps to make sure when you use the service that you pay for, that you don't bully other people. Okay. Sure. And around the world, governments do try to put responsibility on internet service providers to block websites, to block URLs so people can't access illegal or improper things. But again, when you're talking about, the users of a site and the conduct that they engage in, it's quite hard for Digicel or Vodafone to, stop your conduct, or to even, do you want Vodafone to be monitoring everything you type, everything you say, everything you do on your phone 24 hours a day, anytime, and have that vetted and sent to government or something? What level of responsibility are we calling for here? And reasonable steps. Well, again, that's a bit of a nothing statement. Okay, and so then we conclude and we say, okay, so, yep, we need to do some things to the Act. So, look, overall, like I said, there's some good things and there's some less good things about this paper. There's perhaps a few things in here as I go back over it again this year. There's definitely quite a lot of research, so it gets good marks for that. There is some sloppiness with the writing, and we saw that. I liked the structure. I'd like to see the recommendations section after the intro, but it was quite logical and it flowed well. The content, yeah, look, on reflection, I'd maybe say this as well over here. I'm just going to do that. There's some limited critical analysis. Arguments are made that don't seem to hold much water when we sort of push them slightly. So I'd sort of maybe would drop that down slightly here, but lucky student last year. And yeah, and here we've got, the style guide. So look, I've said relatively minor non-compliance. The student at least has references, and there's an attempt to put them in a useful, in a good format. So that is our first sample, even though it says sample 2 if you've got really good eyes. And what I will do now is I will shift to our next sample. Okay, so we're going to have a look at this example now. So I've marked this as an excellent paper. Let's see. It looks at the Tonga's Family Protection Act 2013. So let's start with the abstract. Okay, you can see a few comments on the side. So we identify the act. We say what the act does. We say that we are going to identify gaps using the PALS Minimum Standards Framework. We're saying that the first part of the paper does this. And we're saying that the second part of the paper does this. Chef's kiss. Perfect. What a good abstract. Just some little things that we might tighten up. That could be better framed. We could just get rid of it. We could just say domestic violence. We could start here. Domestic violence has become one of the most common infringements of law in Tonga. We could frame that even more strongly. But yeah, this doesn't necessarily add anything to the start. It's text. I know what they're getting at, but anyway. But really good abstract. And hopefully you can understand why that structure is good, right? This is what I'm talking about. This is why it's important. This is what I do with it. This is what this paper does. It says that, blah. It talks about understood. So we're actually, mini essay. It's applying this and saying to bring about change, these are recommended. Great. Really good stuff. And then this student, rather than starting at the introduction, I'm okay with this. Put it before the introduction, maybe after, but this student says, look, here's the recommendations. Use a communicative approach. There's a little bit of lack of detail, but use a communicative approach. Draw from traditional authority. Law reform is needed, and there needs to be better monitoring. And so, I've said all of these here. I said that this isn't quite a recommendation. Use this. Use rugby players. Because what specifically? So the recommendation is to help improve understanding and to protect people and the act. This strategy is recommended. Use influential leaders to address it. And the importance of speaking out. Okay. But how? How do you use them? What's the strategy? Okay, we should always use leaders to speak out on things that are important, but what is the strategy? How do you, so I've said it's not a recommendation. Maybe I should have said that it's not really a strategy. The recommendation might be specifically to, have a rugby player, have this person, this royal person, lead a campaign, whatever. What's the recommendation should be tangible, right? If you recommend something, it means the person that you're recommending it to should be able to take what you said and just apply that. Go away and just apply that right away. Whatever it was you said, good idea. I can apply those words that you gave me just now and implement them. Ideally, that's what you want a recommendation to do, because when you're writing a paper like this to, a government decision maker, a busy person receiving dozens of submissions, they will pick up your submission and they want to know who you are and why you're relevant and important, and how do I implement? Do I like this idea? Okay, it's a pretty good idea. How do I implement it? And they don't want to think about it. They don't have time to think about it. The idea is you want this to change, this law to change in a certain way. How should it change? How can it be strengthened? What should the decision maker, the person reading it, what should they do? What do you want them to do? And that should be clear. That should be, yeah, clear action, not, yeah. And so here, you know, this is specific. We've said that there's a need for law reform. There's a need to review the penalties imposed. And a need to consider maybe a bit it could be expanded, but and a need to consider rehabilitation services. And so, you know, there's awareness that there's specific things. It'd be hard for me to go and implement that immediately, but it is at least directing the decision maker to an area. All right. So I've corrected them here. It's not a framework for this. It's actually a tool for assessing it. It doesn't. It itself is not a legal framework, but that's okay. Ignore my mean comments. Pretty good introduction, right? We start with the Act. We talk about the standards, and we talk about what the paper's doing. Okay, we've already said that we can get rid of that. We're repeating ourselves a bit. And here we've mentioned PALS, and hopefully we'll find a reference to PALS down here. Journal of South Pacific Law, 132, 142. Yep, that's right, the page numbers. So good. Discusses PALS, says that they're going to be applied. You know, here's the quote here. And what do we say? Well, it should be effective. Well, is it effective? The Act provides different types of protection. These orders have failed. This can be seen in this case, which is a good example. And here's a study. Here's an actual study. Oh my goodness. Wow. If even like 1 in 5 of you guys could actually cite evidence like research or hard cases, it doesn't have to be a legal case. It could be a case study. That would just be amazing. That would show me that you understand this exercise, that what you're trying to do is tell me this law has a problem. Here, look at this as I explain it. Let me explain to you a case where there was a problem and a breach of a protection order. Let me refer you to statistics and data relevant to this jurisdiction that show that this is a problem. And I'm telling you that these bits of evidence inform us that the law is not being effective. Okay? That's what you're trying to do with this part of your paper. You're trying to say, I have identified several problems with this law. We can characterize them as effectiveness or relevant to the understanding or whatever. And here's an actual piece of evidence, something that actually supports what I'm saying. It's not just word salad that I'm throwing at you, or that GPT will be throwing at me. In addition to the issue of effectiveness, okay, penalties are ineffective. For example, here's a case. This was a recidivist offender. He'd been given multiple lenient sentences and continued to beat his wife and daughter. Okay, so here we have a situation where, yeah, this act, that speaks to me, right? Doesn't that speak to you? I am saying that the act is not effective. Specifically, the penalties. For example, here's a case where a guy was charged with domestic violence and then received leniency. And then he did it again and again and again and kept on getting these lenient sentences. And therefore, the act isn't effectively protecting women or properly addressing domestic violence. Jeez. Pretty clear. Good argument. Tight argument. I want to see all of you justifying your arguments with evidence. Okay. You see how this is actually not completely different from like preparing legal work for court. It's the same thing. You're trying to state a position. The law's not understood. The law's not effective. Why? Well, here's my, if we're going for IRAC, here's my relevant authority, my evidence, and let me explain why this is evidence of what I'm saying, and now let me conclude. This is just good structure for argument, right? And then lastly, this student addresses availability. Okay, and they don't really address how that can be overcome here. But that's okay. I'm not sure if they get to that, and maybe that's why I made that comment. Okay, so we've identified these things. Great, PAL standards. Now, how much have we taken up here? It's quite a chunk of the essay. It's about 800 words here. I think this year students had 2,500 words. And then this recommendation section, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? Oh, great. Look at that, nearly 1,000 words. Huge chunk of the paper. That's what I like to see. So, okay, these are the strategies that are recommended. Okay, you wouldn't really, there'd be other ways of doing this. So generally well discussed. So, communicative approaches. Again, are we talking about communicative action? Are we talking about education and information strategies? Yeah, let's be clearer. But for it to be understood and accessible, awareness things should be conducted by the Family Protection Advisory Council, whoever they are. That's amazing. Wow. That is so clear. I recommend that to address these problems, this should be done by this body with the help of others. Great. As a decision maker, I can look at that and go, well, that's pretty clear. I like it. But why? Well, this is why. Okay, so there's problems victims often won't report. Okay, we need the outreach programs. We need people going to where victims are. We need people doing training in the villages. We need women's circles, and we need women's groups to meet with women. We need men's groups to meet with men too, to ensure that men understand that other men don't tolerate violence against women and children, or even against other men. That'd be a nice thing. Be good if men didn't beat other men. Be good if they didn't beat women and children as well. It's a problem for everybody in society to talk about and deal with, isn't it? So, due to these traditional attitudes, okay, good. We're identifying there's a customary element there. This is what awareness and outreach does. It educates people. It tries to change social norms. It does this. I'd like to see some sort of evidence or some reference of why those programs are good. But, I could go to this ADB source, I suppose, and see if there's something good in there. This strategy. So then they're saying, well, yeah, this tackles the issue of services not being available. So outreach programs provided by legal aid. This has lost me slightly, but I think what I'm seeing here is that there should be more outreach, or that legal aid is not doing this outreach, so this group should. I maybe want that clearer, but again, Okay, yeah, no. So this is telling us we could go to this. Okay, this was a reference to an actual program that's currently operating, or was currently operating in Tonga, to address community legal rights and so on. So this could be built up a little bit better and framed better. But what I'm seeing is this student is saying, hey, look, use existing groups like legal aid that are engaging in these outreach services. That includes dealing with, in rural communities, victims of domestic violence and so on. Let's leverage these existing programs and support those existing programs, and maybe just expand the scope slightly. In addition to this outreach, perhaps we can also talk about the domestic violence issue. and make people more aware of the act or whatever. And then training for police and other authorities. Great. They have a duty to provide services without prejudice or discrimination. Good. This is, it's an integrated analysis. And rather than using traditional means. So again, we're getting at the problem here of police and others in authority, perhaps discouraging women or children from reporting acts of violence. You don't want to report your father for that. You're just going to cause trouble for the family. You don't want to do that. Well, I'm not going to write down your report. No, I'm just not going to write it down. You need to sort this out inside the family. Okay? There might be some issues that are like that, but beating children is probably not one of them. So this student is saying, I'm aware of this. This is what happens. Again, we could articulate it more clearly, but it's there. I can pick that up. So police and others need better training to deal with domestic violence issues and the law. Okay, now, when the student actually gets to talking about traditional authority, they actually do have a bit more detail for an initiative, right? So they talk about I guess it's still, something conducted at a grassroots level, young men's idols. There's a little bit more detail. I don't know. I think something that would be really good, and a few of you will be doing similar issues. Something worth looking at. The student has sort of gone for domestic violence, Polynesian families. There's an article from New Zealand. Again, pretty extensive depth of research showing me that this student has actually noted this, that, right, victims of violence are more comfortable seeking help from pastors than officials. So then this is actually making this argument for me, right? Like, this could be restructured to flow better, to make the point the student's trying to make better. But, so a way the student could have built this up a bit better might have been to talk about, it's recommended that these things be done. Let me talk about, that a little bit specifically. So, for example, domestic violence campaigns at a grassroots level can target these people and, whatever. Here's a reference to, now here is an example or a reference to where this has been trialed somewhere else in the region, in Tonga, wherever, and it's been effective. And so we know that this sort of approach works to address this sort of a problem. This is then useful to work in, right? We know these sorts of things are effective because studies show that victims or survivors of violence are more comfortable going to pastors than the police, probably because they don't want their husband locked up in jail, and other things. So this student, though, has previously acknowledged that there's a problem if we're just going to rely on traditional approaches to address this problem. So this student has said that, history of religion, some ways that some religious people justify their values includes, the man is the head of the household and the only way to deal with a disobedient wife is to beat her. I think it's gutless and weak. What man can't overpower a woman? Maybe a very skinny, small man. There's probably several that can't. But in general, we know men are bigger, stronger, faster, more powerful. If a woman has upset you, a big man does not slap him. It's like slapping a child, right? Can't fight back. Too weak. What did you prove? What a big man. What a big man. He can slap something that can't, he can injure something that can't fight back. It's like kicking a dog. Wow, you tough person, right? Didn't you show us? Okay. Yeah, so this is critical analysis, right? This student has at least shown that, look, this is a good approach. We can draw from authority figures, but there's actually some issues with that. So we've got to be careful about, yeah, who we go with. Yes, studies show women are more comfortable going to pastors, but another issue with that is that maybe the pastors will justify it to the woman and say, oh, well, I mean, you should have had dinner ready for him when he got home, or whatever. You don't know. So good, really good, amazing, gosh. I mean, we're not going to solve the problems of the Pacific through these essays, but hopefully you're going to develop the capacity to sort of think about, well, here's a problem. What sort of problem is it? Well, it's a problem to do with understanding. Well, how do we address that? Well, we have to teach people. We have to educate people and do other things. How do we do that? Lots of ways. We've got existing programs that currently do that. We've got these NGOs and other groups that could be doing it. We've got this council that could be doing something else. And we've got priests and pastors and other community members that we could get involved. We've got rugby players. We've got all these groups that we could sort of draw together into campaigns and strategies for dealing with this. And we need to be mindful, though, that, you know, some of the people we might want to use to promote these good messages themselves might be implicated in these things. Royal family members, ministers, the occasional priest. So again, let's just be aware that, yes, this is an effective strategy, but we have to mitigate the risks. And then the student's saying a review of the penalties, okay? Don't need to go into detail, but again, this is what the current penalties are. As shown in this case, the perpetrator, this is a bit informal, got off countless times. Well, you know, now I have to go and look at the case to see if they did get off, but simply giving probation doesn't deter DV. Great. Here's a comparative approach. Came out of nowhere, but that's okay. Good use of the comparative approach. In California, penalties for DV include mandatory rehabilitation. So, I mean, is that effective? Has it been working? It probably has been moderately effective, but at least tell me that, and it's effective, and therefore we should consider that same sort of thing here. Again, we've got the issues with resources and funding and so on, but we could address that. And then finally, monitoring. So how a protection order is issued, they're not issued by the police. How are they being complied with? So this would be really good, right? So this student's saying, hey, to address the problem, we need more information. We need more data. There's things we can do. We can train police and we can try to run some grassroots campaigns and other things, but we need to monitor this too. There's not a lot of information out there. Excellent. Oh my God. Amazing. Good. So, yeah, a lot of things in this paper that sort of elevate it and sort of make it really stand out. And then we have a really good conclusion, right? DV poses a threat to women and children, and mainly just women and children. Therefore, measures other than this act should be taken to not only strengthen the act, but also to ensure the legitimacy of the law. Okay? Motherhood statement. Such measures include public awareness campaigns to inform people of rights and so on, monitoring mechanisms for protection orders, training of police and judicial personnel, and for these to be effective to address these gaps, it needs money, it needs government commitment, and if we do that, we can protect survivors of domestic violence. And we're missing a bibliography. But honestly, with this paper, I was so happy to read it because there's so much good detail in there. So I went, well, all right. You did all this research. Look at all these footnotes, right? Look at, we've got 27 footnotes. We've got, a footnote every 100 words or so. Amazing. Love it. So, but have that bibliography. This wasn't 15 out of 15. It might have come close to that if they'd had that bibliography, but very hard to get maximum marks. So that is then that sample paper. All right. Well, I think I'll take us now to our final example, and here it is. So this is a sample of a paper that was not good. Yeah, okay, so, because it's mostly not satisfactory to satisfactory. Why is that? Where have we got? Okay. So here's the abstract. I'm trying to zoom out so you can see it all, but I guess we'll just start here. There's the abstract, and I think it ends here. It looks like it's nearly 600 words. And it's maybe this is the abstract. I'm not quite sure. But this is maybe the introduction. Yeah, not a good start. Okay, so debated and passed on a date under a standing order. The bill, what bill? Inserted provisions to the Electoral Act. That's not how you cite that. Existing law. What? The Electoral Act 2014 is an existing... You don't need to say this. This is redundant. To give the Commission the authority to make and submit rules on this, to pertaining to this, to the this, to the this, to the this. Oh, okay. But what is the paper about? Right, mini essay. So all public polls must be through guidelines and this. What is the paper about? This is necessary to safeguard the authenticity of elections. What is the paper about? The law has ethical and scientific objectives. There's scientific objectives? Scientific objectives emphasize changes be done immediately. But changes, what changes? To what? To what inconsistencies with that act? But what bill? The law has... Okay, so authority is crucial for enabling the supervisor. Is this the supervisor of elections? To investigate claims of violations? Ethically? It raises breaches with values of international law? Legal norms rating privilege? Wait, how are we talking about legal professional privilege now? And civil rights? What? Well, which ones? And elevate the authority beyond what is required. And it overlaps with FICAC to investigate. Really? Because if somebody puts up the wrong banner at the wrong time during an election campaign, is that a FICAC issue to investigate? Or is it an electoral commission thing to investigate? I don't see the overlap. So confusing, right? So to deal with both of these things, we'll identify weaknesses and strengths, but the paper's supposed to recommend solutions. Anyway, so problems, we can see that. Don't know why it's capitalized. So we've then said the same thing, 1st of September. Oh, okay, we've now got a bill. Right, that's the bill. Again, it's divisive, is it? Good, okay. Was approved by the Fiji Parliament. Okay, Board of Electors suggested this. Again, why is that relevant? This is the bill. This is what the bill says. This is why it's problematic. Whatever. Okay. Administration had votes to pass. We don't care about the votes. It's essential these adjustments to be made. Okay. Who said that? Somebody in Fiji Village. So we've got an online paper said a thing. Somebody in an online paper said a thing. Okay. And what? Yep. Process. Amendment enables this. Okay, but this is, again, this doesn't introduce the paper. This is like, what's all this about? And what's all this about? Introduce your essay. What does your essay do? That's the introduction. Powell. Oh, interesting. Powell? I mean, I could tell you this wasn't the first time this student had done this course. So I was particularly perplexed by the misspellings. Propose these recommendations. Well, didn't Anita Jowett actually propose those? And this is not a reference for that. It's from a journal article published in the... Yeah. So, long list of actions, issues. These requirements are tied to the overall frame. This is a very cumbersome way of trying to discuss this. The time allotted for the reform is insufficient. What does that mean? It's not understood? But did people need to understand this Electoral Commission law? I'm struggling to understand what the investigation powers of the Electoral Commission mean in relation to this. So, fair and effective, okay. So, because the amendments provide that the supervisor can do these things. And this is said to be inappropriate, I think, by the student and does not conform to PALS because it should be fair and effective. Right of an accused to an appeal. Okay. So we've said that, okay, so there is this process and then what the Electoral Commission says goes and there's no right of appeal. I mean, at this point, I'm sort of, I don't know if I trust what this student is saying to me, and I feel like I really need to go and look that up to confirm, because I'm just not sure that there is no right of appeal. There is always a right of appeal from an administrative decision. As provided by this. So... anyone may dispute, however, the judgment is binding and cannot be appealed. So they haven't quoted the text from there, but they've quoted the text from there. So what I want to see is the text from there saying this, because something doesn't sit right. It's also seriously debatable, not formal, how effective this authority and so much power to one individual. I mean, okay, for investigative purposes. Knowing that this has been vested on I don't know why we're talking about FICAC again. Okay? But again, kind of weird. You need to give authority over elections to an individual. With a commissioner body, there's a whole group of people, but there's just one commissioner, the figurehead, the person you appoint to the top job. I mean, that's how all powers work. You could say that the power of the Chief Justice is extraordinary. No person should have that much power, or the President, I'm not seeing the argument clearly. Yeah, I don't think Commission Against Corruption has been dealing with, electoral posters not going up at the right time, or parties not being registered or something. I just don't quite get, again, that argument. Stressed. I'm stressed. Appropriate and available. Efficiency of powers. So Electoral Commission is responsible for overseeing these, and the Electoral Commission should do this, and this is appropriate and available. But this identifies weaknesses and strengths. Now okay, so we've just run on. So it is appropriate and available apparently, but it's not fair and effective, but it's appropriate, and it's confusing, right? Internally inconsistent argument. We've now talked about Kofi Annan. Okay. We require governments do things. Okay, again, not sure what Kofi Annan's doing about this. Electoral administration changes. rational authority to strengthen the law. Habermas refers to communicative action as a social movement. So we're going to strengthen the effectiveness of a law that doesn't provide fair procedures for decision making and appeals by communicating with people so that they understand that. Again, I think it's the wrong strategy for what sort of is being suggested. This student says that, well, the best way to deal with, resolve things is through a public discussion. Without force, undue influence, and the strongest argument conquers. Key is it only through discussion in a free dialogue? Okay. But again, what's the role of the Electoral Commission? It's to make sure both parties don't breach the strict rules around free and fair elections. So elections happen over a fixed period of weeks, 4, 6, 12, whatever it is. How's this process taking place? Everyone should try to reach consensus in every conversation. I disagree. Of a logical agreement serves as a benchmark for assessing I don't know what that means. What does that mean? A discussion won't be justified if everyone's participation isn't acknowledged. What are we talking about now? But again, are we talking about something about the electoral? What are we talking about now? An actor can be only considered rational if they can make a claim and in response to criticism can explain their argument by providing evidence and a clear structure and flow. Therefore, the test of rationality is how well a person can explain their essay in the face of somebody reading it. Okay, so I think you can see, and then lastly, and then it just sort of ends, and there's no bibliography as well. So I think you can see in this that even though PALS has been used, and some of the key things have been mentioned, strengthen the law with communicative action, sure, toss that out there. It hasn't come together well. It's a bit haphazard. It's very hard to understand what's being said and argued. There's a structure, there's headings and there's things, but I can't really understand the argument in a lot of places. And it does mention PALS, but I don't quite understand what it's doing with them most of the time. And overall, there are only about 5 footnoted references, which really 7 there. And yeah, just not quite striking the right note. So, okay, I will leave you with those thoughts. So, you've seen a few different examples of papers. Even the best papers have flaws, and even papers will get good marks with flaws. But hopefully, what you've seen from these papers that I've gone through as the sorts of things that are likely to be most important, right, for you and your marks. So let's get the structures right. Let's introduce PALS. Let's use PALS to say there's a problem. Well, let's say there's a problem with the law and, identify what that problem is using a case, using an example, using a reference, using statistics, data, something. And from the last 3 years, publicly discussed in your jurisdiction. And PALS, if we were to characterize what that problem is, it's this sort of a problem. And then go on to how you can address that problem that you identified, specifically what you identified, not some vague other whatever. And Yeah, ensure there's sort of actionable recommendations. That's sort of what I'm looking for. Sloppy language, I'll mention, but I get it. Um, yeah, a lack of depth for your research. I mean, you're going to be lawyers really soon. At some point, very soon, people will be expecting from you the best possible product that money can buy for several $100s an hour. So what are you producing for that? How much work are you producing for that? I'm not paying you that, but you're paying me. You're paying for this training, right? You're paying to do this. So how much effort are you putting in? Because I like anything, like training for rugby, like training for sports. The harder you train now, the better you'll be tomorrow. Uh, the weaker you train now, yeah, obviously you need to take breaks from your training and you've got to periodize that. But you can see then that like PALS is critical. Using PALS is critical. Uh, Research. Show me that you've got research is really critical. And realistically that you have a good structure and flow to your argument. Your arguments can be weak. You can lack a little bit of detail. You can lack a little bit of support. Um, you can be sloppy with your referencing, but you need to have enough references. You need to talk about PALs in a way that I've repeated 70 times now. And you need to have, a logical flow for your argument. And other things are important, but less less likely to cause you to fail if it's just that your writing is a bit sloppy because English is only your fourth or sixth or 12th language. I can only speak English, so you're ahead of me there, but I can overlook a lot of that, and I do, as long as you are committed to improving that, because not me, but somebody made the language of law in your country English, and it's not changed. There's been a lot of years of independence to change. In fact, it was independence that made it English, so it's required, right? So you commit to being better at that, and I will look for your good ideas and arguments, but please have those. Um, and looking forward to reading your papers, and I'll see you all next time. Cheerio.